On this episode, special co-host Scott Coates and I discuss the positives and negatives of riding cars and motorbikes in Bangkok.
So if you've ever sped through cars on a motorbike or sat in traffic watching them speed by, you'll dig this episode of the Bangkok podcast.
Sawadee krap and welcome to the Bangkok podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who followed a friend to Thailand in 2001, who likes the idea of durian, but not so much the taste.
And I'm Scott Coates, another Canadian who came to Thailand in 1999 and fell in love with having a sweaty back and sweaty chest all the time and never left.
Sexy.
Yeah. Before we start, a huge thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. For further info on how you can become a patron, just head to the support page on bangkokpodcast.com.
True that. And of course, one of the cool things our patrons get is an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every single week where we talk about current events in Thailand and whatever else comes into our minds. Scott and I just finished recording this week's bonus show and we chatted about all of the extra holidays we've had over the past month or so, how I corrupted my son by playing Grand Theft Auto on the PlayStation with him, and how the changing of the seasons wreaks havoc on your commute, your transport, and even your wardrobe. It's like being like an adult snowsuit. Remember in Canada when you had a snowsuit?
Oh, do I remember a snowsuit? Yeah. The onesie was great as a kid. The whole slide into one big thing. That's and right. Just you're living in a fluffy, warm tube.
You got to have that in Thailand, but for rain instead.
Yeah.
All right. So as you may have guessed, with Ed being away on vacation back home in the US of A, we are delighted to have our old friend Scott Coates back to fill in as co-host. Scott co-hosts the Talk Travel Asia podcast and was literally the second person that I ever met after I landed in Thailand all them long years ago, back in 2001.
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
It's a long time ago. I'm old, man.
Me too.
Old. So in this episode, Scott and I thought it would be interesting to get into various modes of transport that we use in Bangkok, specifically car versus motorbike. So I have a car, and Scott, you mostly use a motorcycle. Mm-hmm. So we each have very different ways of looking at the city in terms of getting around. And I thought we could just discuss, because it's almost like two different cities. Getting around Bangkok on a motorcycle is very different from getting around Bangkok using only a car.
Or not having a motorbike. You know, in my case, I had a car, a Honda Civic, before I moved here in 99.
Yeah. I
owned no transport until only about 2016. So my first pretty much like 16, 17 years, I didn't own any kind of motorized vehicle.
Yeah, exactly the same as me. You got your first motorbike in 2016 about?
Around 2016 or late 2015.
Yeah, that was about when we got our first car, our first family car. It was actually my wife's sister's old car. She gave it to us. And it was funny because I was adamant up until that point that we don't need a car. Mm-hmm. Like there's a SkyTrain, there's a Subway, there's Uber. Back then there was Uber, there's Grab.
Canal boat, don't forget that.
Canal boat, motorcycle taxis. Like there's so many ways to get around here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't have it for a long time and it never bothered me. Mm-hmm. But I gotta say, man, after having a car for 2 or 3 years, I don't think I could ever go back to not having one.
And for us, like I'm married and I just never had a need to have transport. And I look at traffic, I'm like, I don't need a car. Luckily, my pretty much entire professional career here, the furthest I've lived from home to an office was 4 kilometers. And I've just enjoyed that if traffic's horrible, jump on a motorcycle taxi, or if I'm near a train, just use whatever is around and convenient. But my wife and I, about 3 years ago, we thought, let's buy a hog. So we got a 110cc Honda Cub.
Yeah, a hog. There's a biglet.
And I'm not even sure why we decided to buy it, because I think I'm a pretty skilled motorbiker. I've ridden motorbikes my whole life. And I do think this, if you are going to ride a motorbike in Bangkok, you should have some skills. It's not a casual, relaxing kind of thing.
Right.
And I didn't think we would use it that much. But I've got to say, since we have had it, we go a lot of places, and we go to a lot of places that we would normally not go if we had to probably get in a taxi. If you're like, ooh, get a taxi. Is it going to take 15 minutes or 45 minutes?
Yeah, am I going to have to deal with 15 guys saying no, they're not going to take us?
Yeah, but just having the motorbike has definitely like opened the city a bit, and that we'll jump on because I'm like, oh, it's 15 minutes to get there. Let's go have dim sum, or let's go to that, Muklop crispy pork place, or let's head down to Yaorat, and because it's just a fixed amount of time. So we do definitely, especially eating, just go to eat at little kind of street side places way more than before we had a motorbike. So it's been really great for getting out.
Yeah. And I sadly kind of find myself, because I try to do my part for the environment, but I find myself like places that I could easily get to without my car. I find I'm often driving anyway, just because it's so nice to just sit in there and crank up your podcast, especially when I'm by myself. Because as anyone who's married, and especially with children, know, alone time is like valuable premium time. So I like to get in the car by myself and just crank up my music or listen to a podcast, and it's cool and it's comfortable, and I find it almost relaxing actually driving in Bangkok. It does take a long time to get somewhere sometime, and as we talked about in the bonus show, if it starts raining or something, and then it's just a shit show. But the funny thing about driving a car is that because and you probably the same experience, because I took taxis and stuff for so long in Bangkok for so many years. Now, like if I didn't have Google Maps, I wouldn't know how to get around, unless it's like the main like Silom, Ramaphore, Sukhumvit kind of thing.
Right.
Like if you said to me, "Oh, get up to Dusit or head out to some place sort of a bit further out," I would have no idea, because for years I would just get in a taxi and sit in the back and look at my phone or listen to music or sleep or whatever. And as a consequence, I don't know any of the roads or highways or how they connect. So learning that is really difficult. And yeah, if I didn't have a GPS, I'd be screwed.
It's funny how quickly that has changed our ability to get around, is because it wasn't that long ago that there was no Google Maps and it was paper maps. And yeah, how did we get around? And I know, strangely, I think I've paid attention in taxis. So I do know how to get around a fair bit of the city. I might hit a one way that I don't know where to go. But expressways, that's a different can of worms. Like if you're going to use the expressway, yeah, I would definitely need to use Google Maps probably to get on properly and to get off. For sure, if I'm going far-flung area of the city, I wouldn't really know where to get off. So I hear you on that. Like I often, even before I drive my motorbike, I check quickly, like, hang on, if it's right. How do I get there, and kind of have a look? And yeah, it is a godsend. I don't know how we did it without it. Like it's a crutch.
I heard an interview with Kevin Hart the other day. I think it was on, what podcast was on? Mark Maron's podcast, WTF, I think. And he was talking about this, and he had this sort of epiphany. And he was driving in LA, and his phone battery ran out, and he realized he was was useless as a person. He didn't know where to go. He couldn't call anyone. He didn't know any phone numbers.
Yeah.
And he's like, it sort of woke him up, and it's like, God, like how much do we rely on these ridiculous things? We're literally useless without them.
I don't know my wife's phone number.
I only know mine because I forced myself to memorize it because it was embarrassing that I didn't know it. You know why? Because whenever I go to a villa or go shopping, they always ask for the membership number.
Yeah, okay,
I don't have one, but my wife does, and she gets mad at me if I don't use it. And I just got so tired of going like, I don't know. Like they're always like, who's this other guy that just is not interested in membership points? All you have to do is give us a phone number. So I finally remembered it, so my wife doesn't yell at me anymore.
Yeah, but Google Maps, I hear you. It's indispensable when you start driving a car. Again, especially using expressways. For listeners that don't know, you can't take motorbikes on the expressway at all, right?
Right.
So it doesn't matter if it's a huge motorbike like 1000cc or 100cc, they can't go on the expressway. So me driving a motorbike, I haven't really had to contend with that, except when I've rented a car or something like that. But yeah, it's pretty indispensable. This is not an easy city to get around. And actually, I think of one time I was at the Bangkok airport a long time ago, and these guys, Suvarnabhumi.
Yeah.
And these guys were talking about, when we get there, we were on a plane. When we get there, we're going to pick up our rental car and drive. I can't remember what hotel they were staying at downtown.
Yeah.
And in almost anywhere else in the world, like, okay, you show up in Madrid, you could pick up your rental car and get downtown. But the idea of that in Bangkok, like showing up to Suvarnabhumi and say getting downtown to say Sathorn Road, like how would you do it?
Can you imagine, like for first timers to Bangkok?
Impossible.
Oh my God.
Impossible.
That'd be a nightmare.
Yeah, couldn't do it.
I remember we rented a car in Salzburg when we were there. And I wanted to get a stick shift because I love driving stick shift, and they're hard to find now, but it was an option. And I was like, yeah, I'll get a stick shift. We're doing all this driving in Austria, and it's going to be so fun. And Salzburg has, at least the area we were in, had a lot of hills. So first of all, I'm trying to get used to this clutch on this car on a hill,
Right.
going from a stop at a stoplight to rolling uphill. And then also all the signs were in German. So I'm trying to read the signs and figure it out. And people were honking and yelling at me. Dude, it was stressful. I imagine that what it must be like for first-time visitors to Bangkok when they rent a car too.
Yeah, I like stick shift cars, but yeah, if there's a lot of starting and stopping hills, it's not where it's at, really.
Yeah. Thankfully, Bangkok's a big pancake.
I think, as you know, though, we just bought a car because my wife's taking a new job and she's going to have to drive 41 kilometers each way to work.
Right.
So I did just buy a car for the first time in Asia, and it has been sitting parked in my condo's parking spot for the last 3 weeks. Yeah.
Have you driven it at all?
I drove it from the dealership where we bought it about 3.5 kilometers home. Yeah. Honestly.
And how was that for you?
The drive here was okay, but what is kind of funny is I think I'm good at driving a car, but even the 3.5 kilometers here, I was kind of uncomfortable, like a new driver, because I'm used to the little motorcycle and weaving dangerously in between cars. But somehow being in this big car and sort of the space it takes up, I was actually nervous. I was like, oh no, like really a little cautious. And the most annoying part was I thought, oh, on the way I'm going to pass Top's grocery store, I'll pick up my groceries for the week.
Yeah.
And I went downstairs into the parkade and I spent the next 20 minutes literally driving in circles trying to get a spot. And I had made a decision, okay, enough of this. I'm going to go home and I'm going to park the car and get my motorbike and come back. And I thought I'll do one last lap and a spot opened up. But if I drove my motorbike there, I can park no problem. But yeah, first trip out in the car.
And you were like,
I had it.
The hell with it.
Yeah, and I haven't driven it in 3 weeks, mostly because I've been busy. I haven't been going far. And yeah, I'm not willing to drive and contend with traffic.
It seems, now correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me, like I've never driven a motorcycle in Bangkok, but it seems to me that it would be really easy once you take away the inherent danger of driving a motorcycle in traffic.
Right.
But it seems to me that you could basically go anywhere and there's very little traffic jam. I mean, if you go across, like when I have to drive to work in the morning across Sapantaksin Bridge, sometimes it's so jammed that not even motorcycles can move.
Okay.
But outside of that situation, it seems to me that there's just, you don't really have to contend with traffic jams almost ever.
It is a very good point. Like when it's rammed, you can't go, you're going very slowly, like between two cars, and then you've got to turn left around the front of a car, and then sort of, I'm going to say in between another lane. It's not actually a lane you're driving down the dotted line, like Sukhumvit. What you really want, the prime roads are the ones with a bit of a shoulder that are technically bike paths or bike lanes like you'd have on Satuan. Those you can get down quickly. When it's really rammed with cars, then you're going slowly between cars and you kind of end up like having to go straight and then turn left in front of the car and then right and then around the next one. But you can always at least generally be moving. Yeah. So that's really good. You can be moving. There's a sense of progress, which I find if I'm locked in bad traffic in a car, that is mentally draining when you just don't go anywhere.
Right.
So at least on a motorbike, you're like, okay, I'm moving, I'm going, I'm making progress. And yeah, I've rarely been stuck like for a long time on a motorbike anywhere. And you said go anywhere. The cool thing is that, you know, your old area, Talat Noi or by Yawarat, is you can go down the smallest of little alleyways, right?
Right.
And Thai people do it. They smile. You can cut through little things. And not that I actively commit moving violations, but you can just, it's okay to go 50 meters into a one-way. You just stay on the side near the sidewalk or like, that's okay. And here it is okay. Like you can somehow just kind of do that and it's okay. So
can you imagine doing that in Canada if you saw like a motorbike going the wrong way down a one-way street? Like,
no way.
Someone call the cops.
Or even a bike between cars. I remember a few years ago, I went back to our home city, Calgary.
Yeah.
And
what's that called? Lane splitting?
Maybe.
In the Western countries?
But this was ridiculous. So there was cars waiting at the light. And I mean, tons of room between the cars. And I just rode my mountain bike between cars. And people started honking their horn at me.
Really?
Guy yelled out his window, like furious that I had ridden my bike.
Your bicycle.
Yeah, ridden my bicycle between cars. Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. But shows you how different it is.
They'll just stick up the ass.
Yeah. It like freaked people out.
Really? Can you imagine if you did it on a motorcycle? People would have lost their minds.
I'm sure it's illegal, but yeah, you definitely would probably end up in a fist fight. Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah. And of course, riding a motorcycle, you are at the mercy of rain. If it starts to rain in a car.
Yeah. Got to own a rain poncho.
I mean, you're stuck in stuck in traffic, but at least you're just like, well, I'll just sit here longer. But on your motorcycle, you've got to carry special gear.
Yeah, it's not a big one. I think in essentials, you got to have a little storage box off the back behind the passenger seat.
Right.
And so in rainy season, I carry fake Crocs, a big rain orange poncho that kind of goes down to your shins or so. And I usually have a t-shirt or something. So most times I'll just throw that on and you just go for it, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's not too bad. I mean, once you're wet, you're kind of wet.
What does your wife think about riding on the back? Is she cool with it?
Yeah, somehow she's just fine with it. She has dirt biked with me.
She's pretty adventurous.
Yeah, she has hung on for dear life on tiny, steep hill tribe footpaths with me on a dirt bike. Yeah, she seems to be fine with it. I mean, there's no way I would do it. I wouldn't sit on the back of a bike. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, my friend picked me up and I sat on the back of his motorbike, and I don't like being on the back. Like, I consider myself a competent driver, and I really don't like being on the back, except strangely motorcycle taxis. I'm willing to get on those somehow, and often without a helmet.
Well, that guy's a professional.
No, he's clearly a professional. He only had a couple drinks.
He hasn't been drinking all
2 or 3, but I mean, yeah. So, yeah, she's all right with it.
Cool.
But it has its advantages and disadvantages too, right?
Yeah. One thing that throws it totally off the rails is having a kid. Which,
Yeah.
You know, like we didn't. I think we got our first car when I was like, I think my son was like a year old. So we last maybe a year, maybe a bit less without a car. And of course, like the first 4 or 5 months, you don't really go anywhere anyway. But there was a good 6 months there where we were using Ubers and SkyTrains and strollers. And I was very optimistic. Like, oh, people in New York, no one in New York has a car. They take their babies around all over the place. And, you know, I'll just put on a little baby Bjorn, you know, those things where you strap your baby to your chest.
Yeah, I've seen them.
My stroller folds up, no problem. I'll just run up the stairs. Dude, it sucked. And, you know, it's you're sweaty, the stroller thing, and then you also got diaper bags and stuff like that. It's so much more pleasant to just throw your crap in a car and go. It makes it so much easier, and it's hard to sort of get across how much you appreciate how easy it is without having done the really difficult shitty parts, you know.
I can see it. It's kind of like you don't know how good first class is until you fly first class, right? And then you can't go back to economy. But I can see it. I've seen you rock up to our place, you know, with Kellen and your wife and all the equipment. And yeah, I can absolutely see it. Like, once you can have everything in that car. And there is something to be thought about. Like, traffic sucks, but the time, say I'm 500 meters from an underground train.
Yeah.
So to walk to the train, to get your ticket or to get in, wait for the train, ride the train, let's say go up and then catch the Sky Train. You add all those times up. If you get in a car's probably 15 minutes slower. Like, it's often not that much longer when you add up the pieces.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to drag a kid and all that equipment, like,
right,
you're winning actually in the car.
What are you willing to give up to not deal with all that?
Yeah.
And this is one thing that sucks about it. That has always pissed me off about taxis saying no. Because especially when I had a kid, like sometimes in the morning when we were taking him to his kindergarten, you know, we would take a taxi a lot of the time. And, you know, you're standing on the side of a busy road. You got your bag over your shoulder. You got his bag over your other shoulder. You're looking for taxis coming down the road. You're waving at them. And at the same time, you got to keep an eye on this kid who's jumping up and down and wandering off. You know, it's super stressful.
Yeah.
So I think it's okay to say it's also a safety issue. And of course, you get in the back of a car, if they have a seatbelt, they sure as hell don't have a baby seat.
Yeah, you're not getting that in.
Yeah, so when you have a kid, I think having a car is almost a necessity. That might seem like a weird thing to say, but coming from a guy who was like you, 15 years without a car, who was adamant that it's not necessary, I think it becomes necessary, especially with a kid.
Yeah, I don't have kids, but I completely buy into what you're saying. I think it's reasonable. And at a point, you just have to pick your battles in life, and it makes it easy. And especially with all that equipment, all those things. Yeah, I think you're right to have a car. I wouldn't want to. Sorry, I do have a car. I was going to say I wouldn't want to have a car. It's for my wife. But yeah, I mean, the one side though is now that we have it, the one thing I've been the worst about is always thinking, oh, well, we should just rent a car and drive to Kanchanaburi for the weekend, or grab a car and just head a few hours out of town on the weekend. I have done that close to 0 times ever. And for whatever reason, the just act of renting the car on the Friday night and doing it never happens. Yeah. So one thing I am looking forward to about having a car is actually doing that, is saying, hey, let's knock off work a couple hours early and go to whatever province within a couple hours of here and see some more places. And I think we will do that. And having it makes that easily possible.
And you know what else I like, which is related, is now I have access to a lot more bike trails. Because I got a bike rack, which are fairly cheap. So I can just toss my bike on the back and I can drive out. It greatly increases the options I have for bike riding.
You've just piqued my interest. I got to get a bike rack and find out where I can ride my bike outside of the city.
Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be outside the city. It's just like, I'll meet you at the temple out by the airport or something.
We did that once, right? We drove
you
north.
came with me.
Yeah, and we met Andrew and had a good ride out there. Yeah.
Right. So you couldn't do that without the thing. And especially now, you can't take bicycles on the SkyTrain. So it's kind of stupid.
Or on the airport train, which is ridiculous. Yeah.
So let's each talk about the one thing that pisses us off about parking for cars. I'll do cars, you do motorcycles, because we talked about this quickly before.
Okay.
The one thing that pisses me off most about parking, I usually don't have that much of a problem with it, except you go into a mall and they've obviously spent hundreds of thousands, if not more, bought on these advanced parking systems that count how many cars there are.
Right. The
they
green
show you
light,
a green
the red light.
Right,
those are
right.
awesome.
And then you go around a corner and you're like, oh, look at all those green lights over there. There's tons of parking. And you come around the corner and all of the spaces are blocked off for like VIP supercars or something like that. And I'm like, you've just totally screwed yourself. You've just spent all this money on this system, and then you put a couple of little iron barriers up, and suddenly it throws it all out of whack.
Yeah.
And that just pisses me off. I hate it.
So I totally hear you on that one. Like, what a sign to customers that, like, yeah, if you don't have a nice car, we don't value your business as much, right?
Right.
And on that note, that touches completely upon the one that sends me through the roof. So if you have a motorcycle, and let's say you're going to a mall or an office tower, inevitably the motorcycle parking is always in the bottom level of the building, in the back corner, in the hottiest, most humid, worst part, and it's always full.
It's like Thunderdome
because they don't have enough spots. And I really feel like, look, I make a decent income and everything. Motorcycle drivers should be rewarded. We're not causing traffic problems. We're using less fuel. But just because you drive a motorbike, it's assumed that like you don't have money or you're not good enough. And you get literally sent to the bowels of a building. And even worse, like major office towers, I've been to a couple on Saton Road where they do not allow motorbikes to park inside at all. So I had a meeting at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and in their building there, you can't park a motorcycle inside.
That's
crazy. It was about to rain, and I had to try and find parking and wedge my bike in an alley, and I came out and it was raining. And so I had to get wet to get on my motorbike. And I'm like, why is that? Like, because I'm driving a motorbike, having a meeting as a customer with one of your tenants in your building, like I can't park. So there's that. It's a complete like class-based thing based on what you're driving. Yeah.
Interesting.
So that really, really gets my goat.
Well, I think the only solution is then to I'll buy a Bentley and you buy a BMW motorcycle.
Well, then there is better parking for big bike. They usually have big bike parking.
Oh, yeah.
Which is slightly better parking zone for big bike parking.
You're only on B3 instead of B4.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. It's like, well, I guess you use a little more fuel and you take up a bit more room on the road. But, to be fair, like I figured it out, cost me about $1 per kilometer to drive my Honda Cub, 120 baht for an oil change from a Honda dealership. Like, I don't know how the economics of that work. My insurance is about 500 baht a year.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just so cheap. And I actually considered buying 50cc nicer bike. But then I was on one and I realized they can't cut through cars between the lanes as well.
It's too big?
Just a bit bigger. Turning radius isn't as good. So I think what you want here is actually a small, light little bike. So the Honda Cub is the way forward. And my wife can drive the car. We use it, I guess, once in a while. But I think a bike's a good way to go. But I would only say to somebody with a motorbike, like, make sure you're really a competent rider. Like, really competent, and you have to pay attention and shoulder check every single moment. And the one other one is, even though this is Thailand and still the Wild West a bit, if you don't have a valid motorcycle driver's license, you are not insured.
Right.
And
that's a big thing.
Yeah. And when I say insured, like insured if you hit someone's car, but your medical insurance, if they find out you had a motorcycle accident and you don't have a valid motorcycle license, you're screwed.
Yeah. They won't cover any treatment.
No treatment. You are completely uninsured. And a lot of people, I know it's easy because if the cops stop you, you just, I've heard you can make a donation and they'll let you go. But yeah, the reality is if something really happens, you're really in trouble.
SOL.
Yeah, so you should get a motorbike license if you're going to drive a motorbike here.
I don't have one. I got to get one.
Well, you don't drive a motorbike.
Sometimes I do. When my sister was here a few years ago, I drove in Chiang Mai. Anyway, there you go. Insights into different modes of transport. I'm curious as to what our listeners do. Hey, listeners, drop us a line. Let us know. Do you drive a motorcycle? Do you drive a bike? Do you not have one at all? Do you think were you like I once was, where you thought having a car was a ridiculous idea? So, yeah, let us know. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into some love, loathe, or live with. And that's where one of us surprises the other with a particular aspect of living in Bangkok, which we then discuss and decide if it's something we love about living here, loathe about living here, or have come to accept as just part of the crazy tapestry of Bangkok. So this week it is my turn. I'll give one for you, Scott.
Okay.
This is related to our topic.
All right.
You're walking down the street
Yes.
and a motorcycle flies by you on the sidewalk.
On the sidewalk.
On the sidewalk.
Okay.
What do you think of that?
And I'm walking.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really pisses me off.
Really?
There's been people that live here and read the news. I'd say the last year, there's been more news about motorbikes driving on the sidewalks. Even some students, like I think a girl ended up in a coma. Some stories of people being knocked over. The cops supposedly give a fine.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think it's super ignorant. Like, I get it. Traffic's bad. And then they hop up onto the sidewalk to get past all the traffic or to come back into a one-way. I think it's super ignorant. It's about one of the most ignorant things you could possibly do because there is so little pedestrian space in this city. So yeah, motorbikes on the sidewalk is, it's dangerous. It's inconsiderate. I'll live with it, right? I you've got to live with it. It's part of life here. That said, I mean, you don't want to get in an argument with a motorcycle taxi driver because, I mean, these guys are part of a powerful club. Sometimes they carry weapons, but there's been a couple times where I've said to them in Thai, like, it's forbidden to drive on the sidewalk, and kind of look at them as they drive by. And yeah, it's not cool. It's not cool.
Someone got their ass beat a few weeks ago. I read in the paper I doing that. Some Thai guy said something like that, and they turned around and came back and beat him up.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. So it's a live with just because I do live here. But yeah, I think it's something the cops should just crack down. It should just be one of those things. They could take care of it in a week. No problem if they were serious about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Well, that gets into a whole other subject about actually enforcing the laws that already exist. But yeah, I agree. I'll live with it. It doesn't really bother me as much as it bothers you. I think it's, I don't think it's cool. And I'd probably appreciate if it didn't happen, but it's never really bothered me. Like,
okay.
You know, I've never had a close call or something like that. Granted, if I was walking with my kid or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, I'll live with it. I think it's just a part of living in a big city. It happens all over the world. Bangkok's not alone in that. So.
I don't think all over the world.
Well, I can't say all over Asia.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good.
At least Bangkok's not Hanoi. Put it that way.
Yeah, that's true. They park on the sidewalk, so you can't even drive on the sidewalk. So
yeah. Or like San Francisco now, they got those electric scooters all over the place, and people are getting so mad they're throwing them into the ocean.
Oh, really?
Or they're smearing them with dog crap and stuff like that.
Oh
yeah.
Man, first world mentality.
First world problems.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so before we wrap up, I'd like to give a special thanks to all of our lovely patrons. As you know, we don't run ads or have sponsors, so we really, really appreciate the support we get from our patrons. If you want to learn more, please go to bangkokpodcast.com/support. And if you want to get in touch with us, it's super easy. Bangkok Podcast on social media, bangkokpodcast.com on the web, or simply bangkokpodcast@gmail.com. We're polite. We will read your email, and we'll leave an answer.
Yeah. And you can also find each episode on YouTube, and you can also follow us online, where we post each episode and carry on conversations with our listeners. You can also reach out to me directly on Twitter, where I'm BKK Greg. So thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you back here next week.
I felt the booze start to hit me a little bit. Like, it's funny, just partway through, I was like, I kind of feel this booze.
Often that makes it better.